Good evening. It's now 7 p.m. and I call the meeting of the Silver Falls School District Board to order. It appears we have a quorum. We've got 4 people in person and 3 participating remotely. So I think we are ready for the agenda review. Would anybody like to make a motion?
I move to adopt the agenda as published.
Second?
Okay, it's been moved to adopt the agenda as published and seconded. I don't think we'll have any discussion, so go ahead, Debbie.
Owen,
Yes.
Lori, 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 you're muted.
Yes.
Tom,
Yes.
Jonathan,
Yes.
Janet,
Yes.
Aaron,
Yes.
Jennifer,
Yes.
all in favor.
All right, so our next item, which is the first of our discussion items tonight, is the Options GED program. And Leslie Roach, Director of Teaching and Learning, is going to present to us.
Good evening, everyone. Attached to Board Book on the agenda, you'll see the actual application for our GED program that we're interested in running at Sequoia Falls Academy. This would be for high school students in our attendance boundary and in surrounding neighboring attendance boundaries who have completely disengaged with school, and we're not going to get them through to graduation so that they have another choice as they move on in life. And currently we have been, for the last few years, our application lapsed. And we have been sending students to Chemeketa Community College for GED options. And we are now applying with ODE to offer that again here within the district. And so there's a full application here for you to review. And one of the reasons we're presenting this to you today is the state wants our superintendent to sign and agree to that the school board is approving this and it's consistent with existing district policies, rules, and contracts. That's on the front page, the first bullet point on the front page of the application. So we wanted to bring this to your attention to see if you have any questions or concerns around moving forward with this before we sign.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So you mentioned that this is something that had lapsed a few years back. Is this different in some way from the prior incarnation, or is this simply a renewal of something that had been occurring? And I guess I'll just point out, I don't remember hearing that this had lapsed, actually, so that's interesting.
Yeah, I don't know the exact time of when this lapsed previously. In the district, in previous years, we have offered this as an option, but it's been several years. I think perhaps this is kind of the ebb and flow of students in need, and we have always had the opportunity to send kids to Chemeketa for this purpose, and we foot the bill for that. And so it's just a different, when we have more students, I think we're more interested in doing it in-house rather than paying for them to go to Chemeketa.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
So will this come back to the board then at a later date for actual approval?
Well, Dan and I were just discussing that because we had not seen that bullet point previously. We had thought that we wanted to have a discussion with you before we signed it, but at this point, we believe that it may need to be added as an action item. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think when we were exploring it, we thought that all we needed to make sure it was kind of agreed upon by the board. It's really an action of the superintendent. Seeing how this application is written with approval, maybe it does need to be voted upon.
Do you think that needs to happen tonight, or can we put it in September?
I think it could be on the agenda whenever you think it's appropriate.
I would appreciate a little more time to look it over.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't have any questions. Think it's fine, but yeah.
Tom, Lori, or Owen?
I have a question. By us doing it in-house, we are saving money, but also does the state also supplement us in some way for offering this through Sequoia?
Not that we're aware of.
Okay, thank you.
My question is that it would seem to be advantageous for students because it would be here in Silverton that they wouldn't have to commute to Salem.
And so that's kind of a two sides of the same coin. We want to provide students who have completely disengaged with school an option to move forward with a GED, but we also don't want to make it too easy, right? As educators, we always want to make sure that they're getting a diploma if they're capable. And so that's part of the safety procedures we have in place of multiple measures before a student would have this opportunity.
And that's part of that application process that's later in the document?
Yeah.
Okay, that's helpful, thank you. Any other questions?
Well, I just want to follow up on that because that raises an interesting point. So if a student is accepted to this program but then identified along the way as being someone who perhaps is capable of receiving a regular diploma because maybe they just needed some extra support, are they able to then move out of this? And is that the kind of flexibility you're talking about? Or
That is what we're hoping for by doing this on site, is that we would have many opportunities within Silverton High School, and then students have a whole application process before they would have services at Sequoia Falls Academy, and then they'd have to be within Sequoia Falls to then look at GED options. So we have multiple safety nets in place before this is kind of a last-ditch effort to get students what they need to be more successful in life after school.
got it? Thank you. Yeah.
So like
Yeah.
as a system, we're generally saying that we believe that Sequoia is going to be more beneficial to you than just going straight from high school to GED.
Yes.
Correct. And I think part of the reason why, Leslie and I weren't here, or part of those conversations were that the GED was, we don't have that, that's over at Chemeketa, we'll pay for it, but it was kind of maybe an added barrier to keep kids, engaged. But in our conversations that we've had with both the high school and Sequoia, is making sure that all of our care team processes, all of our systems are in place before we would allow a student to explore this as an option. But we didn't also want to say, well, that's over there. Because I do think, to your point, Janet, that if somebody then all of a sudden decides, hey, I really do think I want to go I'm experiencing success, I think I actually can get to that diploma, they're still here with us.
Right.
So,
And to me, it almost adds another layer of vetting to keep them in here, right? Rather than sending them off to get their GED, let's give you every resource possible to make sure that they have a full diploma. So I think it's a wise step for us to do this.
Oh, go ahead.
On just a purely financial question, does this mean we have to add staff, or is this purely cost savings potential for us?
There's a fee associated with each GED test that a student takes, and we're responsible for paying those fees for students within our attendance boundary. So I think it's mostly just a cost savings measure at this point. The current staff at Sequoia Falls would be assisting with this.
Right. No, that sounds like a real win-win across the board, so, yeah, thank you.
All right, if there are no further questions, we will probably look for this at another meeting to vote on it. And then let's move to 3B, Bond Advisory Committee process. And Scott Drew, Superintendent, is going to present.
Well, good evening, Board, and as you know, we're going to spend the rest of this evening talking about a couple different things, all related to what we hope will be a successful bond journey. We have Wenaha Group here. We have Dave Fischel and Cassie Hibbert, who are here today walking all SFSD facilities to sort of get the lay of the land. And they're here to really talk about the Bond Advisory Committee, what that is, how that will look, and then what the timeline will look like this year. And then Jeremy Wright from Wright Public Affairs is here to give you a little bit of background, some key learning on what Polling 101 looks like, because we do have polling coming up in a couple of weeks, and we can address that questions that you might have as the presentation concludes. So having said that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dave and Cassie so they can start their presentation.
Great, thank you, Scott. Can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm not used to microphones at board meetings. So thanks again for having us. Okay, well, Scott already started off with introductions, but here's our photos up on the screen. And Jeremy is currently getting his company photo updated, so I put him in there as the strategy guy with the gears turning. So basically, 4 goals that we have for tonight. First, I'll start off and give you an overview of our bond advisory committee process, and then I'll turn it over to Dave to lead you in a discussion of the board's priorities for the bond advisory committee process. And then at that point, we'll go ahead and turn it over to Jeremy, and we'll talk about his presentation called Polling, Why, Who, and How, also AKA Polling 101. And then we'll finish off tonight and talk about what we're calling the State of the District polling questions. And this is an opportunity to get a temperature on any issues that are bubbling up in the district before we go into a bond process. So in addition to the folks that you have in front of you tonight, we have a few other key team members as part of this process. So of course, we'll have the Bond Advisory Committee itself, which we'll talk about in a little bit when we look at their charge. In addition, we've identified district staff to be the leadership team and the coordination on this effort. So that will be Scott, Steve, Lauren representing facilities, and Derek representing the communications department. And then on the school board side, we also have 3 board volunteers that have offered to be board liaisons for this project. So Jennifer as board chair, Janet, thanks for joining us, and then Owen, who I believe is on the Zoom tonight, will be our 3rd member. Our other partner who's not here tonight, who has a history with the district, also working in this pre-bond process, is BLRB Architects. We're going to continue to have their involvement with design support as we dive in a little deeper on some of our options, and also as we work to update costs on these projects. Okay, so let's start, and we're going to talk about the Bond Advisory Committee and what are their responsibilities and what are they doing as part of this process. So also in your board docs tonight, you have another document that's in there, which I was hoping that we could switch to on the screen right now. So it's called the Charge for the Bond Advisory Committee. And I think maybe while we're switching that, I'll just go ahead and speak to it. And so part of the reason why we wanted this document is to have a very clear set of responsibilities for why the Bond Advisory Committee is involved, exactly how long they will be meeting, and what is their final deliverable to the school board. I'll just start on the top with the overview. I'm just going to hit some highlights on here, and you can read the whole thing yourself. So we are planning to have this group be about 15 to 20 community members plus admin and support staff to consider options for submitting a potential capital construction bond to voters in November of 2023. And the superintendent will be the liaison for this group. Item 2, type of committee. We have identified this as a board committee that will submit a recommendation to the school board. That means it will be subject to public notification of meetings and public reporting. We think transparency is incredibly important as part of this process. Third, the charge is that the school district is considering a potential capital construction bond measure. This is a continuation, and I really want to point that out, a continuation of all the work that's been done to date with the district's long-range facilities planning committee. The bond advisory committee will consider various options. The plan is that they will meet 4 times from September to April of '23. Thanks. And their job will be to review the facilities needs already identified by the Long-Range Facilities Planning Committee. They'll consider options for financing of the potential bond, including the amount of the bond and the length of the payback period, both very important. They'll also develop a timeline and a long-term plan for addressing those projects. They will, and this is also very important, consider community feedback in creating the recommendation, which when we look at the schedule later, we'll talk about how we incorporate that. And then finally, their end deliverable is that they will recommend to the school board a potential bond package that can be submitted to voters. That last item ties into the next one, which is authority. So this committee is only empowered to make a recommendation to the school board. They do not have the authority to make any decisions on their own. The board is that decision-making authority. Let's see. Item number 5, duration. We're trying to not make this process too onerous. We know there's been a lot of work going into this so far. And so the plan is that we will have either 4 or 5 meetings of the Bond Advisory Committee. That 5th meeting is sort of an optional if we need it for that process. And then the plan, which we'll look at with the schedule, is that their work will wrap up basically in May of next year. And then finally, last item on here is committee appointments. So the appointments will be made by the board. Those appointments are intended to last the duration of the committee. And we want to, our goal with this committee is that it includes representatives from a variety of community stakeholder groups. We want to make sure that we have the most complete representation from the community and voices from all of those different areas.
We want to just perhaps give Scott a chance to talk a little bit about where he is in that process.
Sure, and I have a couple of slides to share with you at the end, and I just want to make sure we get through all of this context first, and then I'll end with the bond committee and exactly who is on that, and explain to you how it is that we came up with that, what our methodology was.
I screwed it up. Thank you. Okay, so to walk through this process in a little bit more detail, what we're going to do is follow the yellow box or not yellow, orange box as it marches across the months. So to start off on the first one here, and sorry, I'm trying to do 2 computers at once. So our first orange box is today, where we are right now in August. So we're here with you to give you an overview of the process and an overview of polling strategy. Following that, you can see there's the gray box marked poll. After our polling strategy discussion today, we're going to go ahead and launch into that state of the district polling, so we'll have results in hand by the time we start going into our first meetings with the Bond Advisory Committee. So looking at September, then when you have your regular school board session, you'll have 2 tasks in front of you for that session. So one will be to formally approve the Bond Advisory Committee charge, which you have that document for review. And second will be to approve the list of the committee members, which the district is still working to compile those.
Okay, then moving into October, now we are going to have our first bond advisory committee meeting, and we are still nailing down the dates for all of these meetings, so I've just kind of left it as general October for now. So this first meeting is going to be an introduction meeting. It's going to make sure that we are all operating from the same set of information regarding this process. So we will be reviewing the charge with the committee. We'll be looking through the timeline, similar to what we're doing with you tonight. We'll also go back and we'll look at the long-range facilities planning work to date. There has been a lot of work. We know that we'll have some, I'll call them returnees on this committee from previous efforts, and we know we'll have some new folks as well. So we need to make sure we're all up to speed and operating from that same set of info. Also, in this October meeting, we'll review the results of our State of the District polling. So if there's anything that that group needs to be aware of, we can get it out on the table there. And then finally, we'll be working with that committee to also discuss what are their priorities for this process. And I think that's a really important one here, is that this committee, nobody's going to tell this committee what their solution is. This committee needs to generate their own recommendation. And so Winnahaw will really be working as a facilitator on those discussions, so the committee is coming up with their own ideas and their recommendation. And we'll be backing it up not only with our expertise in school facilities work, but cost estimating work, as well as design support from our architectural partner. So moving on to November, we will have our second meeting. So this is the one where we will be digging into the financials. So we'll be reviewing the district's updated bonding capacity. We'll also be talking about what we think could be the total amount of bonding that would be appropriate for this community, and that will be a very important discussion. And then at this point, we'll start looking at what are the actual project options that we have here. And one of the things that Dave and I have been working on is really getting our heads wrapped around your cost estimates for your projects. And as we know, construction, it's always changing. It never really gets cheaper. So we want to make sure that we're getting that updated and bringing you the best possible information to make decisions. The other thing that we're going to look at in that November meeting is also some updated options for the middle school replacement. We know that that's going to be a focus of this effort, and we want to make sure we're getting out in front of that and being able to bring some options to the committee for their consideration. So moving on to December and January. So earlier I mentioned there was an optional meeting, so this is kind of where this comes into play. If we can do it in one meeting, great. If we need two, we've got that built into the schedule. So the plan here is, this is where we really get down into the nitty-gritty of what does the committee see as priorities for these options, and putting together the package for their recommendation. Then in January, we will come back and we'll see you again. And this is where we'll give you an update on the work that's been done to date and the recommendation, the draft, I'm going to call it the draft recommendation at this point that the committee has put together.
But they may be options.
Or draft recommendation, draft options. Because, and thanks Dave for reminding me, the next thing that we're going to do is the community feedback phase, and that's where Wright Public Affairs is going to have a big role in this. And this is where we take those options, draft recommendation, draft recommendations, and we put it out there with the community and we test these options. And so we've already talked about a few different strategies for doing that. So first one is just general public meetings. One focus in here is that we need to make sure we're not just hitting people that are already involved with the school district, because all of your voters are going to have a say in this. And so we need to make sure that we are getting feedback from people that aren't already engaging with you on a regular basis. That might mean presentations to civic groups, other groups in the community, basically trying to get in front of anybody we can that would give us a little bit of time to talk about this. And then the district has had great success with listening sessions in the past. And originally the district was planning to do those for the fall, but we have talked with both Scott and Steve and think that those might be more appropriate in the springtime, so that we can also fold this bond feedback into those listening sessions. in addition to that, you can see the little gray circle, we're also going to do some polling work here as well to also test those options. So then that takes us to April. So April will come back to the Bond Advisory Committee and we'll say, well, here's what we heard from the community. And this will give us an opportunity to take a look at those options and refine them as needed based upon that feedback. And the goal coming out of that April meeting is to now have a final committee recommendation at that meeting. Then that will take us to May, which we'll be back to see you again for a school board work session. And the plan is that, of course, Winnahaw will be assisting, but we'll have a couple of Bond Advisory Committee members that will hopefully raise their hand and volunteer. And we'll assist them, but they'll be bringing their recommendation to you as representatives of that committee and speaking not only to the work and the process, but also to where they landed on their recommendation. And then in June, that will be the time for the board to consider their action for the November 23 ballot. There's also a couple other things in the schedule I'm not showing on this, like getting our OSCIM matching grant. That's built into the schedule as well. And this also dovetails with your legal requirements for filing before the November election and all of that. And then moving into June through November, moving into June through November, I think I forgot to highlight that. That is where you will do the bond campaign for the election.
There'll be a whole host of activities around formation of the political action committee and funding for that, and training about how all that works for the members and the staff as well.
So I'll turn it over to Dave to talk about board priorities.
Yeah, so, while this Cassie does a wonderful job and this looks really polished and it is well thought out, but it's not a one-size-fits-all. This is not the same PowerPoint that we just gave the last school board 2 weeks ago, right? This is a product of a lot of conversation and hard work with Steve and Scott and Derek and Lauren and others, and really just our listening about kind of how this community works and us kind of bringing various tools that we've used to play and construct them in a way that we think makes sense for this community. So I just kind of wanted to get that piece out of the way to make sure everyone understood that this is just not Cassie and Dave. This is a group effort and very much a custom process based on your community. And we've heard a lot about what's happened preceding this, and we understand that there's a lot of effort that has gone into this during a time where it was difficult to meet and difficult to move the process forward, and we want to recognize that and honor that for sure and respect it. It's valuable hard work that people have invested in this. But what I wanted to just maybe offer up in terms of a conversation point here is an opportunity for us to listen to you a little bit about your thoughts on the process. And I'll tell you that every board we deal with is a little bit different. Some are very directive and want to create very specific sideboards on the scope of the work that's considered, the cost of the work that's considered, and the process. And when that happens, in some respects it makes our job easier with the committee because we're acting on behalf of the board, and these are the sideboards that they have created. And so when people want to go in a different direction, we have a really easy way to bring them back. Other boards want to just really, really allow the committee and the community to come up with with a recommendation or options that are unfettered by what the board may be thinking today. And that's great too. And just kind of changes kind of some of our facilitation techniques and our approach, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's better or worse. And so I guess I just wanted to take this pause in the presentation to take, your temperature on that. And if there are some specific things you want to make sure are heard by the committee members, we'll send that forward for sure. And we appreciate the fact that 3 of you are going to be there with us along the way and can keep this conversation kind of in real time, which will be fantastic. So with that, I guess I wanted to give the opportunity for you all to maybe let us know kind of where your head's at with this process, if what we've laid out is resonating, if you have any thoughts in terms of the process or specific outcomes that you may be wanting to let us know about.
Great. I think this is an awesome opportunity. We're going to try to get our 3 remotely participating board members on the screen. But in the meantime, who would like to go first?
All right. I think it's a conversation that we've collectively had in little tiny bite-sized chunks over the last several years. I'm not sure we've really spent a lot of time specifically talking about board priorities as it relates to a list like this. So I think as much as anything, I'm curious what other people think. I like a lot of things I see there, but again, I don't feel like we've ever, as a group, said, this is our collective priority as a board, right? At least I don't remember doing that. I will say personally, I think that I want to allow the committee to do its job. I don't know that I walk into this with any hard and fast preconceived notions. I think whatever meets the community's need ultimately that will create a bond that's passable is probably my priority, right? So I will say that. I've had conversations with a number of people in the community on this matter. Everything from why haven't we done it a long time ago to no way and you know what. So, and I think you mentioned it's an interesting dynamic in the community. It is. There's an awful lot of things that I'm sure are quite unique to our district. And so I guess that's where my head's at, is I'm not sure I have any specific directive. I will say I participated in the last bond committee before I was on the board, the last one that failed. And one of the things that I think many of us found really frustrating being part of that was that we did go through a process similar, at least to this. We met a number of times, we were facilitated, we talked about it, we had plans and drew it up, and we made a very specific recommendation, and the board threw it in the trash and did what they wanted, which was different, and the bond failed. I can't say the bond would have passed had it been ours, because we didn't run that sample, but it was very frustrating. So I think my reflection on that is that I want to let that group do its job and trust the process, because I don't think any one of us knows more than the collective wisdom in that group. So I guess those are some things. And I'll throw one more thing out on a personal level. I've heard an awful lot of people say, whatever it is, try to keep it so that it looks, I don't want to say the same, but has a look of a school. I don't know, there's a lot of new schools that have been built that don't look like schools anymore. And so I've heard that come up from people. I don't know if the facade of the building is even salvageable, but something that sort of has that sort of, I'm a school look, not I'm a prison or I'm a warehouse, right? And so, anyway, those are just some thoughts that I have.
Jonathan, I'm aligned with where you're at too. I want to respect the abilities, the input, the wisdom that's in the collective of our bond committee, you know, and I know that our district will, and Scott and our district administrative staff will help form that committee with utmost care, with being very deliberate in who they pick, making sure all seats at the table are represented in our community, because that's what we're going to need to have this pass, right? We're going to have everybody on board, so to speak, everybody with that shared vision. And like you said too, Jonathan, my biggest thing as a board member is I want to know exactly what our community wants. We almost need to know the vote before we go out for the vote. Mm-hmm. And so whatever our committee can do to ensure that, you know, they've done the homework, so to speak, with our polling data, listening to people that they talk to in the community during the listening sessions, so that when they come back to us in June of 2023, it's a laser focus, and we have to take what they say as this is where we need to go. And I'm like you, I want to trust this process because these people are going to put in a lot of time. I mean, I was on the long range facility planning committee. We put in a lot of time. We put in a lot of effort, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears on that one. And we need to respect that group because they are the pulse of our community.
Yeah, I'll just tag on. I'm completely in agreement with all of you. My biggest interest is in a bond that the community can support and get excited about. I think on the board, I think we all have a shared commitment to knowing the facilities are in dire need, but we're also very diverse. We're not a monolithic board by any means, and so I think we all recognize that, and I don't know that we would be the kind of board to say this is what we're all pushing forward, but I think we're all really vested in our community and represent a lot of diversity in our community, at least in some respects, and really want the community to have the schools that are important to them be safe and appropriate for students. And yeah, I echo what you're saying. I think I'm right there with you.
Those of you who are participating remotely, you want to just give me a regular hand raise or there you go, Owen.
I'll agree with everything everybody said. Obviously, we're not monolithic, but we all, I think, are on the same page with regard to wanting a bond that will pass as our ultimate goal. And we're all in clear agreement that we have dire needs. I guess I'm inclined, having gone through this before, also to really let this bond advisory committee work without giving them too many specific priorities. I think our long range committee has done a lot of that work already, but and they'll be able to use that. I do want to say I don't want to forget, and I don't think we're forgetting, but obviously the priority is on the students, but I don't want to forget our staff in this. I think our buildings are every bit as important to our staff, and what we do for our staff directly then, in my opinion, it redounds to our students. So I've been to work in dingy, crummy office buildings, and then I've had the pleasure of working in nice, new spaces, and my work was better, and my attitude was better, and my life was better. So I think that's important to not forget all of our staff that work in our facilities as well.
Tom?
Yeah, I'd like to echo everyone's words. I mean, I think I really appreciate something Jonathan said about having lots of little conversations all along, and then I kind of sense a process that's going to encompass all of them. I really like the moving of the listening sessions, which were a great success. Kind of moving them around and using that successful thing as part of the bond process. So. Things look really good for this one. I mean, I don't think anyone's ever disputed that we need more facilities. But I think that one of the things we have now is we have the ability to bond for more money, and so we can capture more facilities needs. Hopefully, get some more support. So, yeah, thank you. The process looks good and solid. Thank you.
Lori, I don't see a hand, but I'm assuming that you are going to want to speak.
Sure. What I'd like to say is that the idea of maybe even having subcommittees that could consider, I think Jonathan mentioned something about the aesthetics on the outside. That might be interesting to have more community members involved and understand what that may look like. Or I know that the Long Range Facilities Planning Committee did a lot of discussion on layout. And I think, I don't know if those would be subcommittees or other groups that would weigh in, but I certainly want to hear from the community on that. And I would agree that employees need to have, along with Owen, the ability to weigh in, and hearing from teachers and those who work in other departments of the school to give their ideas and thoughts and insights, because we want this to be highly functional, very positive, of course, and for our students to thrive and feel comfortable, and that everyone has a great space to support. So those are just some of my thoughts. I think it just echoes what everyone else has said. Yeah, but I would be open for subcommittees on some of those other things if the need is there from the community. So, thank you.
And I think I want to piggyback on Lori's idea about the aesthetics, and Jonathan. I think that's probably important for this community. Also, and I don't know what format that would take at all, but just something to bring up. I do think it's really important for teachers to have a lot of input in layout. I've used this story before. My very first year teaching went into a school that had been added onto, remodeled, and there was a space that was intended for teacher workspace, right? It was never, ever used once for teacher workspace. So, I think we like to imagine better ways to do things. Just check with our teachers first, because I think they have a really good instinct on what is going to work and what isn't going to work. So that would be a priority for me. I love your approach about transparency. Thank you for bringing that. I also sense a lot of humility in your group. You're not going to tell us what we need. You're going to help us shape it together, and I love that. There was one other thing that I was going to say, and now it has escaped me, but, just the process. I trust that this process, it looks really well laid out. We met, Aaron and I met you briefly at the district office, and I just get the sense that the way that you are choosing to operate is the way that we, I guess, would approve of. And so we trust. And I want the community to have as much input as possible, because, again, this has to be we with a lot of people involved. So thank you for asking. I don't think you'll get a directive from us, though.
Yeah, loud and clear. We are going to trust the process, and that's awesome. I really appreciate that affirmation. It gives us really clear marching orders, which is great. It's going to be very helpful. Let me just comment on a couple of things. So one of the reasons we have VLRB kind of on call is for design assistance through the process, and so we will advance the designs further in this process. But it's kind of a two-edged sword, because when the bond passes, that's when the design work begins. And then there's a whole nother round of input that takes place with all the stakeholders again. And thousands and thousands of decisions will be made during that process that now is not the time to get into that level of detail, right?
Got it.
But the other side of that, that is we need to inform the voters with enough detail that they understand what they're buying, right? And so we are gonna advance the designs, but we're not gonna choose paint colors. We're not gonna decide if it's carpet or vinyl, right? But I do agree, especially at the middle school, that we have to kind of establish a aesthetic, I'm not exactly sure what the right word is, but an aesthetic standard, right? And it doesn't necessarily define exactly what the school looks like, but we're gonna be talking about things like the level of pragmatism that the community expects. And kind of on the scale from very pragmatic to lofty and inspirational design, where is the community wanting us to be, right? That's a really appropriate thing to talk about, and we will. And then we'll ask BLRB to express that in enough detail when we have a meeting with the community to ask for their support. They can feel good that we're not building a palace, but this is not, a hay barn either, right? That it's appropriate.
So it'd almost be like you'd have a concept kind of
Exactly,
like,
right.
like that when they release new concept, cars at the auto
Exactly.
show, right? You see a concept of what's coming in the next 2 years. It's
Right.
kind of what it's going to be, but it's not exactly what it's going to be.
Yeah.
And you want to be careful, right?
Yeah.
Because I've had clients get themselves in trouble by being a little too specific in that process of passing a bond, and then they're prescribed, and then
Mhm.
there's a process that happens with the back end costs and all that, and it looks very different if people get upset. The other thing that to be a little careful of is understanding what images you put out there in the community for how they be receptive. What Dave was saying, example of a place we work in Southern Oregon, they didn't ask us, but they put up they're going to do theater in high school, and someone in the social media department just put up an image during the last month of the campaign of a theater from Broadway as an example of kind of look at this amazing palace, amazing opportunity for our kids to do in a conservative Southern Oregon district, and that actually probably was the final nail in that effort because it blew up, right? So this is an example of that, be a little what imagery, how you talk about it, especially in building a new school, it's important.
One of the committees, and frankly, our biggest challenge really, I think, is where to draw the circle around the scope and cost piece of this. Because, there is a great deal of uncertainty in terms of construction costs, and there will be for the foreseeable future, right? So we need to be very, very conservative in our cost estimating. But we also want to be kind of optimistic and hopeful, and not be so conservative that people are feeling like they're not getting enough bang for the buck, right? And this is a really tricky dance, especially in the current market conditions. And so we're going to have a lot of conversations about how do we talk about the scope that we intend to achieve. And again, you need to be real careful, because if you're very specific about the promise, then you better doggone deliver on that promise. And if you said we're going to do X, Y, and Z at this school, and you can only afford to do X and Y, your credibility in the community for the next bond measure is not good, right? And so there's ways to talk about our planned improvements that are, aren't dishonest in any way, but they leave us a little bit of latitude. And if we can, if we get good news in the market, inflation wanes, and we can afford to do more, we have a mechanism in place to work our way further down that priority list. If we get some bad news, then the community has kind of been set up for that expectation, and maybe we don't get as far down that priority list. But it's all, cards are up on the table, it's all transparent, and the community, if we're doing our job right, will understand and support the decisions that we have to make.
So you're saying there's contingencies basically built in on either side?
Absolutely.
Gotcha.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we are all very well aware about credibility. It's been a we have some history in our district, and that's a hard thing. So we definitely want to be able to deliver what we promise.
Yeah, and our philosophy, no matter what we're doing, is to leave the community and the school district in a better place than we found it. And so, you know, we're going to do everything we can to help you continue to build those bridges, continue to build trust, and strengthen relationships. And if we do all of that right, the bond will take care of itself.
One of the things that occurred to me as you were talking about credibility and as you were talking about some of the pros and cons of different approaches, I think you're going to hear a lot, I suspect you're going to hear a lot in this community also along the lines of, well, I'm not giving them a blank check, right?
Right.
So I think there has to be enough
Yes.
detail
Right.
that people are going to say, yeah, I can buy into that.
Yeah, we can't just say we're going to improve
Right.
your school.
Right.
Trust us.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and our voters are definitely critical consumers.
Yeah,
So
right.
I'm sure it is that way in
Yeah,
all
and
districts.
That's where we're going to spend a lot of time with Jeremy's advice and oversight advice from staff and the community's input to really craft that message.
Right.
So it's credible, it's true, and it's transparent.
And those of you who are participating remotely, I do have my eye on the screen, so let me know if you want to chime in. I remembered what I meant to say earlier. I also really appreciate the honoring of the work that the Long Range Facilities group did, because again, all of us we're not going to give you a directive because we know how much work went into that process, and we trust what came out of that process. All right, it looks like we've said our piece.
Thank you.
Well, I think we'll turn it over to Jeremy for the next part.
Is that just queued up over there on your computer?
No. Somebody else has to take care of that.
Okay. that's-
Here he comes.
Yeah.
Presentation for you.
While I'm waiting, queue up, one of the things you talked about, you know, we work with a lot of school districts to kind of help guide you through the process, both political communications side of things. And I always like to say, you know, a successful bond effort is one of those Venn diagrams of what the district's priorities are and needs and staff needs are, kind of that circle. What the community priorities are and what they want to pay for, how much they're willing to pay. And those aren't the same thing, right? Because people always want more than what they're willing to pay. And that is different from maybe what the district's overall needs are. So a long-range facilities process will identify that larger circle, but our job is to get you those other two circles overlapping to a point where we have a bond you can go out for that meets somewhat
Right.
those three concentric, that middle, that sweet spot. And that's what this process is. So talking through polling methodology. So when we were meeting a couple weeks ago, we started, or a month ago, we talked about going out with an initial poll for you. And one of the things complimentary I had to compliment the district for is you are giving yourself a really good on-ramp in this process. You're giving yourself space and time to do it right. You're not calling in January for a May election and trying to figure it all out along that timeline. And so part of that is that you're giving you space to do some different things with polling that we don't always necessarily have a chance to do. And so one of those is that, you know, we will get to a poll for you of the community that's around the bond, specific about the community priorities, price point sensitivities, all that. But in the conversations and thinking about the development process, there was a real desire to understand the community's attitudes generally towards your district and kind of this, you know, towards issues that you've been facing, kind of testing some of the historical questions you have. And so that's what we've been working on over the last month and want to go forward with this fall. So it kind of helps you set up and So maybe answer some of those questions so you can put them aside, so you can talk about the bond and not other things, or just in a transparent way for the bond process. So that's the survey you have in your board book, or it was sent to you, that we're planning on going out for in the next or a couple weeks after Labor Day. But I was asked to kind of talk a little bit, again, thinking about the process, is like, how do we do that? Kind of, let's pull back the kind of the curtain, so to speak, to talk a little bit about our process, and so you understand it and you can answer questions, asking questions. So why do we poll? It's a lay of the land, so it's a snapshot in time, and I think this is really important. People sometimes think that polling is incredibly predictive of exactly what's going to happen for you in November 2023. It is not. It's a poll. Polling is where are we today? There are predictive elements to it that we can use to guide us in the process, but it is not completely forward thinking. It's important to remember that. We poll because we want quantitative research and data. So a lot of like the outreach, and you do community meetings, and you do listening sessions, or just get comments on Facebook. That's not quantitative, that's a qualitative, right? Like people are self-selecting into the process. A poll is a part of that, giving a data point that's a little bit different, because it's designed, and I'll get into how we design that, the universe. It gives voice to the entire community. Loud voices are not the only voices, right? And so a poll is a good way to make sure we are demographically talking to everyone and giving people an equal voice, or a weighted voice, I guess to say, to your demographics. It helps guide your decision making, the bond development's decision making, and finally, it helps you avoid big mistakes early on, right? So if there's a price point that no one's ever going to go for, it allows you to take a step back and start over again. We did that in Oregon City. They were in a place where the price point, they stepped back, redid their bond development committee, and wound up winning with 63% of the vote. So, in the polling early on helped us realize that there were some serious problems there. With the bond packets, not the district, sorry. With what they were thinking in terms of this overall cost. So how we poll? We work with the client to identify what the information they want from the poll. We've been doing that for the last month with you all. We draft the poll questions in collaboration, go back and forth. Then we go out and get a list of every voter in your district. It's important to understand that we poll registered voters, and we'll get into that. Not every single resident of your district, those are two different things. We look at your target election date, so you're looking at November 23. We create a universe that looks like that target election date. So I'll get into what a universe means, but basically, what's a turnout of a voting population in a November 23 off-year election is going to look very different from who's voting this November, right? It's going to be this November, we're looking at between a 70 and 75% turnout probably in statewide for the governor's race and other things. You're looking at probably a 30% turnout, right, in November of 23. So because it's an off-year race. And so there's different populations who are voting from your voting demographic, and that's where a universe is. So we want to make sure the people we're calling, so that's the next thing, are people who are most likely to be voting in the election that you're targeting. We randomly call or text. We do some text to web call stuff now, mix of cell phones and landlines. We stop calling once we reach a desired sample size. In most cases, about 400 for a district your size. We make sure that sample reflects the demographics of our target demographics, so we've gotten the right mix, and then we analyze those results. Questions? Okay. So this is kind of small up on your screen, but we have data that software and stuff we have access to, and so this is a map, and unfortunately it's really this little stuff there. But if you zoomed in on this, every single dot is every registered voter in your school district. And it's kind of blobby, but you can go down to the street level and see every registered voter in your district. And I don't have it up right now, but you can't see that number down low, but the actual registered voters. But so then, what I wanted to do this is to show you is I just zoomed in on around your middle school here. And so that's just every registered voter who lives around your middle school. And those colored dots represent different things. We can get into that, but like their registration status or their, various things of who they are data-wise. But so those are all the people we could potentially call. So if we wanted to call as many people as possible, which we want to do with this first poll, and I'll get into that, that's like, for instance, we're calling in that area. But if you wanted to exact same map, these are the people who were voted in 6 out of the last 8 elections. So approximately 30% of your population has never cast a ballot, even though they're registered. And so these would be the people we would want to call when we get closer to your election next year. We have a bond package, we know exactly who, because those are the most likely voters who are going to vote in an election, in a November 23 election. So I do this as a visual exercise to understand how we reduce a universe to, and so people say, who do you call? How do you figure out how you call? This is how we do it. But for your purposes, for this first poll, I want to emphasize that in our conversations, since this is a state of a district poll, we want to get a pulse of, we're going to call everyone, as many people, registered voters. We're not going to be reducing your universe, because for us, the goal of this is to get a temperature of people's attitudes on various issues that your district is facing. But later on, we'll reduce the universe like this. So how do we reach that universe? Just kind of real quick. We create that phone list I talked about from our target voter pool. We reduce the list or do a community-wide survey, which we're doing. We randomly call or text. It takes about 10,000 call attempts to get 400 responses. It's just the reality of the business. It's gotten harder and harder and harder. Thank you all those awful robocalls, that we all hate and get about, Marriott points, whatever, and so that people are just not picking up, and so the text to web stuff is actually becoming more useful in many ways. Depends on the size of the district. We have enough cell phones, because people get it on the cell and be like, hi, this is Silverton School District. We're conducting a poll. Click here, and you can do it on your phone. And we're finding some good responses there. So we're calling, instead of calling that person on their cell phone, we're texting them essentially. And it can be super useful. And then we make sure the sample reflects the demographics. We end the calling, and then we analyze the results. So some common questions we get is, how can we trust the polling, how accurate we are? If we're doing a 400 sample for you, it's about 4% or 4.9% margin of error. It's something to always remember when we're presenting and you look at polling. People tend to take like a 1% thing like it's gospel. And everyone always, for their own bias, ignores the margin of error. So please don't do that. Because I know I have a favorite candidate or whatever, I'm like, oh, they're up by a point, actually. They're within the margin of error, and they're like, why wasn't that right on election day? Well, it was actually within the margin of error, just not the way you wanted it, right? So that's always the case. Make sure you pay attention to the margin of error. Who creates questions? We talked about that, but we created it together. And we have our best practices and how you should ask them, but we take your information. Get this a lot in smaller communities. I don't know anyone who got a call. How can I trust these results? You didn't call me, right? Well, you didn't pick up the phone. But in general, though, the response is random. We randomly call, we dial until we've reached the right amount of respondents to the right demographics. We're not going to call every single person in the district. We'll call and have the right representative sample. Does conducting a poll change people's minds on the issue? We get this a lot. Like, I don't want to ask that question because people may think differently about it. The answer is no, because again, we're going for a random sample. We're going for a smaller sample than your total voting universe. And we're asking a series of questions over a 10 to 15-minute survey. People are not thinking, I heard something somewhere once on a poll, therefore the new middle school is going to look like a jail, like whatever that response is. So the answer is no. Is sample size 400 to 600, depending on, yes. I mean, we do a 600 to 800 is now kind of the margin, the basic we do for statewide surveys. So 400 sample for your district is going to be great. It gives you that margin of error to less than 5%. I've heard about push polling. Do you do that? A lot of people get very confused about this, but push polling is a very specific thing that happens towards really close to election day, and it's designed obviously to get people to change their mind. And it's not a scientifically designed survey, it's not a quantitative research, it's a 5-minute thing that's obviously more of a campaign commercial than a poll. What people get confused is that we will do polling for you later on that tests messaging, right? How do we want to talk about the bond? How do we want to, and that, now, we're not doing that with this first survey, but we will get there at some point. And we will try to test which way to talk about, say, safety and security makes the most sense. And people will get that survey and they'll sometimes think, well, that sounded like they're trying to sell. Well, yeah, we're trying to figure out what message works best. And I talked about this already, does polling predict how we're gonna do on election day? It is a tool that can tell you where you are today. There are ranges of where you are today that will help tell us how you're going to do, right? So if you're polling above 60% out of the gate on the initial poll, we have a pretty good sense that you're gonna do pretty well on election day. If you're in another range, it's a toss-up. If you're below 40, then we need to have a conversation, because I don't think and so there's just ranges, but there's not. If you're polling at 54% today, it does not mean you're gonna win by 54% on election day. It's more of a range. So those, I just answered questions that we get a lot, but do you guys have questions? I have to settle that.
Go ahead, Jonathan.
Okay. When researching our community, what's something interesting you've found that makes this community different, challenging, I don't know, something?
Well, what I've heard, and we've only just started working with you, so it's going to be it's going to be a process I learn over the next year. But what I've heard is that you have if you look on the map, you have a wide geographic community with kind of outlying areas and outlying communities. And so what we've heard, definitely from Scott and the team, is we have to be sensitive to that dynamic between your Silverton and the outside communities, and we got to make sure our polling and our outreach, not just the polling, reflects that difference. And that sounds like that's a good challenge you've had for a while.
Anybody else?
Jeremy, you had mentioned, I think, that the polling takes a couple days to
Yeah, to do 10,000 calls to get 400 people is about 3 nights of calling, typically, or texting, and then another week of Ben and his team, who we work with, Maggie, are amazing. They turn around results pretty quickly, and then we'll come back to both the board and then with kind of the results and a full slide deck that walks you through everything. And we'll do this a few times, so you're good.
Yeah, I was going to ask, how many rounds of polling? I think I may have seen 2 on your schedule.
Yeah, and so I think that second poll is going to be a little bit of a moving target depending on how the bond development committee is going.
Mm-hmm.
The reason I say that is that there might be, we'll have to see what the estimates are, how groups work in terms of the dollar amounts, what your new updated, what you can afford for wherever amount. So just kind of that part, because a lot of times we do a poll that helps put some guidelines around not getting too high on the price point, right? And so like, what's your top level, medium, low? So figuring out whether they need that during the bond development process or or not will be a moving target on that. Because there's basically, during the polling for bonds, is 2 polls we typically do. One is about the priorities of the community and the price point sensitivity. And then once there's a package, once it's finalized, once the board has decided on, before your deadline to file, which is going to be August 15th roughly of 2023, we want to do a second poll that tests the exact language we're going to file, test the ballot language, and then test the messaging I was talking about. So that's typically the 3. We're going to probably do 3 polls for you throughout this process, because we're doing this first one, which is a temperature check, or just a state of the district poll, because you have time to do that, which is really great.
Mm-hmm. I can't see our online folks, but Lori, do you have a question or a comment? All right.
I do, but I can see Owen's hand up, so if he'd like to go first, that's fine. I'm still putting my thoughts together.
Okay, go ahead, Owen.
All right, thank you, Lori. I know that people tend to be very skeptical about polls, at least a certain portion of people, when they receive a poll or a call, they're wondering what's behind it, what's the nefarious thing that's going on in the background. And we've had, we've gotten some of that feedback in the past. I'm just wondering if it's helpful at all, or if it's counterproductive to message beforehand, for the district to message out to the public in some way and say, we're conducting a poll, and here's our motive, here's what here's the information we're trying to gain. So maybe you can speak to that.
People ask that, and the challenge here is that we're trying to provide you with what we don't want people to do is, we want people to pick up the phone and answer the survey, but we don't want people looking for it so that because we want a representative sample. So it's this hard, but I get the intention behind it, because you want to say, this is coming from the Silverton School District, this is legit, we want everyone's voice represented, but from a quantitative, scientific side, if people are looking for it, you'll get oversampling of certain voices who will pick up the phone and others that won't. So it's a challenge, because we don't, want to put our thumb on the scale, so to speak, with your polling, but we also understand that desire, not, because of people have natural skepticism.
We asked that same question yesterday, as a matter of fact, to the folks at Patinkin Research, and they told us explicitly, do not do that.
Yeah.
And because they're coming from a place of science and putting the scientific methodology of putting this all together and really bringing clean data to the bond advisory committee. And because our thought was, we need to let people know so that we get people to pick up the phone. That's the reason actually why we asked. Did you want to mention anything, Steve, about that?
No, just that we asked that question to Maggie on Friday.
Yeah, but Maggie was like, I was on vacation.
She's
but
like,
Maggie
please
was
don't.
Oh, and your question is well taken.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a
I
great
understand
question. I had no idea. That's why I asked.
Yeah, last time there was a poll, there was a lot of people creating ideas that weren't necessarily, the reason behind the poll. So, Tom, do you want to give any feedback or have a question?
No, I'm good. Good presentation, good questions, and I like I agree with the don't let them know when the poll's coming, because it'll modify.
And Lori?
Sure. I too have the same concerns as Owen. I would have made the probably assumption that, could we maybe give a warning, so people are more apt to answer the phone. But if we don't, and that's not recommended, then I can respect that. I think this is where, does the board get, do we get to know what the first survey looks like? Or is that something that you would like to keep close to your chest until you've run a couple more surveys?
So Lori, the plan was, because our board chairs have seen the questions, they were in the meeting last week. I believe we were talking about that, the polling questions. They've seen them. I will forward to the board tomorrow what the questions look like. And I think we just need to ask that it stay within the board, obviously, for the very reasons that we just described. And so we wanted to get through tonight to give you the context, and I will send those out first thing tomorrow morning.
Oh, no, that's not what I was asking. I understand that. What I'm asking, will the board get to know the response from the initial survey?
Oh, yeah. Yes, absolutely.
Does that?
Absolutely. We'll have that ready by the end of September for the first bond advisory committee meeting, and of course the board will be informed of that.
Very good. I think this is where I get a little nervous with surveys as well because of past history, and I think it's really incumbent that everyone understands that we have, as we mentioned earlier about those committees and subcommittees, that everyone involved gets to weigh in so we can all feel a part of the process. So it will be interesting as things begin to unfold. Thank you.
I just wanted to reiterate the fact that I think all of us, we've talked about this before, we want to know if the whatever package that is floated, if it's not going to fly. We want to know sooner than later because we don't want to go down a path that's going to be unsuccessful. So I think we're all really aware of that.
And that's our job, is to both let you know when it's not, when there's a possibility, not a possibility, and then help you craft something that has more of a possibility.
Another question.
Go ahead.
Have you seen, or are you starting to take into account some of the interesting, I don't know, just national political problems that are happening within school districts? And do they impact bonds? I know it's sort of a financial question, but now there seems to be so many more things pouring into school districts as far as expectations, political expectations. Is that creating challenges that are new for you, for bond passing, and how does that play into your all thinking?
Yeah, I mean, we probably run 3 to 4 bonds at election for my firm. So I would say that there are a section of voters who, for the social issues especially, are incredibly important. We haven't seen the bonds necessarily fail because of that. What we've seen in the last 6 months, honestly, is the inflation economy, and this May election was way more brutal for clients because of that. Like, just the affordability question was just front and center for most people. That was way more important to a larger subset of folks. But all politics are local, so so there are contexts of national stuff that has happened in smaller districts that then become a personal thing with board members or a superintendent, and that will hurt. And so if it's not a unified board, for instance, because they're fighting over critical race, whatever, name your thing of the day. If the board itself is fighting over that, that can be a real problem, right? So it's more, what I've seen is less of the actual issue, or maybe that's it's all mixed together, but when there is a problem at the board level or at the district level with those issues themselves, that can fall over into a no campaign against a bond. But for the most part, I haven't seen a huge kind of surge on those issues. It's been honestly more the price of gas.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thanks. I was just curious, and that's a great answer. Thank you.
Which, by the way, getting better. It's
right.
I am, for my November clients, I am so happy, because sitting in June was scary looking at, so fingers crossed for all your fellow school districts. Things continue to get a little better just because of that particular issue.
All right, anything else?
I don't think so. I think we'll transition into, Daniel's going to pull up a couple of slides, and I'll go over with you our bond advisory committee and what that looks like.
Okay. Thanks to all three of you for
Yeah,
your
really appreciate it.
detailed expertise and sharing it with us.
Can you pass me that clicker? Thank you. So as I had mentioned, during the board meetings leading up to tonight, that I would come to you on August 22nd to share our thinking around the bond advisory committee. And so I want to talk for a minute about, the depth in terms of the thinking and consideration of who we needed to have at the table to help us give the best picture for Silver Falls and the best representation. So we have 20 members. And it was really hard to get the number down to 20 because we had so many names that were worth consideration, folks that we really wanted to hear from. But we did get it to 20. I'm going to share with you a list on the next page and kind of outline what the structure of the bond committee looks like and what the role of the board is and our support staff as well. But I just want to go over a couple of really main points. The first is we really wanted a bond advisory committee that has the majority of individuals who haven't served in recent history on a district committee, if at all. So that for us was really important. And of course, we're going off of the feedback we've received over the past couple of years to really make sure that we're being inclusive and getting as many viewpoints at the table as possible. The other is, when we took a look at the finished list, we have just about, I think, Steve, just about 4 generations represented. Definitely 3, but ranging from as young as 26, as old as 75, mid-70s. So that's a really wide historical perspective as well. We have a former student who's now works for Silver Falls. We have some other SFSD employees. We have business owners, community leaders. We have the mayor for one in Silverton, and then the city manager for Scotts Mills is on the bond advisory committee. All folks have been spoken to. We're waiting on 3 to get their confirmation. And nonprofit leaders as well. And then of course we have representatives that are grandparents and senior citizens as well, which are also very key demographic. And so the way that I've have a visual for you, and that's the bond committee there, that's the list. I will send this to you tomorrow morning as well so you can look at it. So TBD, those are the individuals have been identified. I have spoken to them. They're considering the time constraints and the things that they have going on in their lives. But I think it's really important to look at this visual, because if you look at the board's role, our 3 board members, Janet, Jennifer, and Owen, are there as observers of the process. So really letting the bond advisory committee do their work. And so you see on the district team, we don't have a say in those decisions. Our job is to help support the committee, help guide the committee, and of course we're at their service. And the same with Wenaha Group and the others there listed. So we're going to be going back to this visual. I think it's important to always realize that we always start with the school district constituency and then go to the school board itself and then to the board representatives or liaisons in this process before even talking about the bond advisory committee. So I'll take any questions that you have on this list. You'll vote to approve it at the September regular board meeting. And of course, I took into account all of the input that was given to me by board members. And I believe we were able to accommodate almost everyone's suggestions with a couple of ones that we weren't able to do. So hopefully that's reflective of when our board looks at it, that their input was taken into account. But you'll need to approve it as a board since it is a board sanctioned committee. Any questions on that?
How much information were you able to give these folks to help them understand sort of the scope of their work over the next few months?
Yeah, so, well, I personally contacted most of them. Steve did a couple of them, and so did Derek McElfresh, depending on relationships that we have. But let him know the time commitment, number one. Let him know that it would end, the outcome would be delivering a recommendation on a bond to the board that the community could support. And that, you know, the other technical things, the meat of the meetings and topics, that would be forthcoming.
Okay, got it.
We just finalized a list a couple days ago, so.
Yeah.
We actually, also told them if they could try to tune in virtually tonight, they would learn a lot more about the process, and we'll probably send an email to all of them and make sure they know where to find the presentations that were shared tonight to give them some more background, as well as the link to the page on all the work that's been done so far.
Good.
Any questions from the folks online? I can't see you, so I'm just going to have to do it audibly.
No, not for me.
I'm good, thank you.
All right. Sounds good.
One more quick
Yep.
question. So who, is the Winaha Group going to facilitate those meetings? You
Yes.
are. Okay.
Yep.
Perfect.
Winaha Group was brought in
Winaha.
to facilitate the entire process.
Perfect.
And then Jeremy will manage the campaign from the bigger picture, the
Right.
18 months or however long we have the on-ramp.
I'm glad we have a nice long runway.
Yes, absolutely. We learned that actually, Janet, when we went to the bonds and ballots. And
That's right.
How many times did I say that in my presentation?
yeah,
Yeah.
we sat in on Jeremy's presentation.
I remember.
Absolutely.
What was the name of that presentation again? That's Switzerland in it, right?
Down to Switzerland, how to keep them out of the partisan muck.
Oh,
Yeah.
Kind of relates back to one of the questions that was asked. I was trying to think of the name of your
Jonathan.
presentation because that was the whole focus of that presentation was that whole dynamic. Maybe that would be, you still have that one. We can look at it.
So I think what I'm looking for is your humble servant, is a motion by the board just in terms of your support for the process that's been laid out here. You will approve the charge and the bond committee member list at the September regular board meeting, but it's really important for me that I know that I have the full board support to move forward on this.
anybody have any questions in response to that? All right. Well, that is our only action item, is to express that support that Scott's asking for. So I am ready for a motion.
Yeah, I'd like to move that we support the Bond Advisory Committee process plan as presented to us this evening.
Second?
The motion is that we support the board support, or excuse me, the Bond Advisory Committee plan as presented this evening. It's been seconded. This opens discussion. Does anybody have any discussion? All right, Debbie, would you call the roll, please?
Owen,
Yes.
Lori,
Yes.
Tom,
Yes.
Janet,
Yes.
Jonathan,
Yes.
Aaron,
Yes.
Jennifer,
Yes.
all in favor.
Thank you very much.
All right, and without objection, we will adjourn.